Welcome to the Transform Sales Podcast, where forward-thinking business leaders come to share their experiences and ideas, learn from each other, and amplify their results together.
How's it going, everybody? Eddie here with another great episode. Today, I have Lawrence from Playbook Consulting, who's going to be sharing some very interesting information for a lot of companies, but we're going to focus on this episode on startups and SMBs that probably have been recently funded. Lawrence, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. It's a beautiful day in South Texas. I appreciate the invite to talk. Look forward to having the conversation.
Amazing. I love that energy. Now, Lawrence, why don't you tell us a little bit more about this title? Playbook Consulting Group, Fractional Chief Revenue Officer or Chief Growth Officer for Funded Startups and SMBs. Tell us a little bit about this service of yours.
Yeah, I think I'd love to have a cup of coffee with anybody that wants to talk shop and business, but I probably want to start with, I don't primarily consult to coffee groups. So it's across the board. My last name is actually Lawrence Coffee. So I always thought, that'd be a great way to have the name branded. I've been in business services for about 20 years now. My first consultancy was completely different. This time around, I thought, well, let's just make it simple. Let's talk about business problems over coffee and figure out how we can solve them. And so fractional CGO is basically someone that helps with the revenue full stack, has an understanding of the customer life cycle from the earliest steps to the long time ongoing needs of the client. And so I help companies either in the fast growth startup lane or across different sizes of SMBs and different verticals. Look at their sales, marketing, customer success or customer experience functions and find out ways to optimize and improve their profits.
Incredible. So there's a lot of things that you can tweak on that engine that is the revenue engine of companies. We're going to be talking about startups and SMBs for this episode. But before we go a little bit further, tell me, once you meet your clients today, how were they solving their go-to-market campaigns before they met you? What were they doing? What were the challenges with the way they were doing those campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, most of my clients have found success. I want to say that first and foremost, and they're looking to amplify their vision further. So what I find is there's three major areas that there's challenges. The first is where they're working in the business and not on the business. So, you got to delegate to elevate. And so they're executing on those tasks and they can't replace themselves. They can't go on vacation. They're in the business too much. And so that's the fundamental one. The other is where they've had the vision and they've hired someone like a CMO or a fractional CMO who is helping them with marketing, but that's not replacing them again in the sales function. And they might even have a small team, but they're, again, working on managing the team and themselves in either instance. And so there's no one that's helping them oversee their sales function and grow the sales function that has that skills and those experiences. And that's the tip of your spear is sales. I mean, marketing is about creating the vision as far an awareness, but like closing comes from sales. And usually the effective CEO is the chief closer. So that's a huge component where it can tie in. And the other is EOS. I love the EOS people. There are a lot of them in my network. I've done business with EOS folks, but they're like a COO that also does marketing, also does finance. There's a lot of hats in that instance that they're wearing. And so what we bring to the table is slightly differentiated in that we're hyper-focused on sales as the tip of the spear, with a key integration with every function within the business, knowing that there should be no silos, there should be no drama. We need to all work together towards growth.
Now, Lawrence, when you mentioned EOS, were you referring to the entrepreneurial operating system?
That is the one. Yeah, based on the book Traction, which a lot of my clients in the SMB space are familiar with. And what we offer essentially is what would you get from, a Fortune 100 company, a Fortune 500 company, which a lot of my background, I might support today fast growth startups and SMB, but I've also worked for Fortune 20, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and a lot of larger players, and building out up to 9-figure data and AI consultancies, global consultancies before. And that is something that, there's different frameworks involved, different approaches. Like when you get to that size, you have like 7 or 8 different departments that are part of RevOps. And so it's taking some of those lessons and how you distill them down so that folks that are, at a size that can't afford to have 7 or 8 different executives, how can they still be served at, that higher level of capable support?
Amazing. I like what you shared. I want to unpack a couple of things, Lawrence. So first of all, more than a decade of experience building revenue engines for different types of companies, different services, different products. And that gives you a lot of experience under the belt that should be very important for your next potential customer and maybe someone in the audience. But most importantly, you describe a pain point that I've seen a lot of times, especially in companies that are just probably after that first phase of growth and starting to plateau a little bit, which is the business depends on the CEO being there every day. They cannot take a vacation or everything else crumbles. They pretty much became ingrained in the web of activities and operations of their company, and now they have to make every decision. They struggle to delegate. So those are, if we go to the next banner here, some of the challenges that I've heard you mention, right? If they don't have a system that works for them or that scales without their need, they pretty much became from an entrepreneur to a self-employee, right? Because now they
Yes.
have to work endlessly, and it's no longer a 9 to 5. They work 24 hours because they own the business, and if they don't continue to work, everything will collapse. So that's a huge problem, that if you in the audience, you want to grow your company, but everything depends on you and you don't want to grow your headaches, maybe what you need to look for is that system, right, that you have in place. And that's where Lawrence can come in, diagnose, identify what's missing. What are those things that maybe it's a operational thing that needs to change, maybe it's a mindset thing that needs to change, maybe it's an employee situation, but you'll be the one identifying how all those things come into play and what are the ingredients that need to be changed in order to have that mixture for the right engine, for the right revenue engine. Now, why don't you tell me, Lawrence, a little bit about the main features of your service? You were describing before how you work with multiple different companies. So this is not your first rodeo. You already have a system for diagnosing. Maybe your diagnostic at the end won't be the same, but the system that you use to diagnose a patient and say, hey, this is the medicine that you need to take or apply into your revenue operations. Why don't you walk us through how that works?
Yeah, correct. Absolutely. I would say I've built 41 companies over the last decade plus, and of those, I've actually mentored over 124 different companies that were pre-seed before that fast growth startup phase.
Wow.
And so I've seen definitely a lot of different verticals and dimensions as far as, and pain points are typically fairly uniform across. I mean, essentially in a business, you have growth coming in and what you do with that growth. There's only top line, bottom line, really. And so I'm looking basically through those lenses, and I have a set of tools where we do audits, assessments to identify where particular problems are, where we can look at the processes and find out where the handoffs are going down. We can look at systems, like, for example, making sure your CRM has the right types of ABC lead qualification criteria, and those are actually true and meaningful, that your MQLs are, validated, that your SQL process is good, that your sequencing, that your scripts, all of those are components that we look at through these assessments and these audits. It's basically a fit gap analysis. We're figuring out, where are you at now? Where do you actually need to go to reach those goals? And we can help with goals too, but, and putting some realistic frameworks around them, like what do you actually want to do? But that can be a component where maybe someone set a 30% CAGR and they're not meeting that. And maybe they're not meeting that particular goal they're going for. Maybe they're burning through capital because maybe they're a salesperson and they really want to meet that. But then that's reducing their ROI. And if their customer lifetime value is not, strong enough, that could be running into a problem where they're not profitable. So those are the components. We like to look at what the actual problem is versus trying to say, well, we just do this thing, rinse and repeat. We're actually trying to diagnose the actual issue by listening. And that's like I think our key dimension is that we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, as they say. I think Allstate says it, but like it's the same as us as well. And we'll come in and listen to try to diagnose what the actual issue is through that audit and assessment, which can be a component of overarching week-to-week support in a fractional basis.
There's two things I want to highlight for someone in the audience. And number one is, as you just mentioned, this is not a one-size-fits-all type of consultation and service. The solution will depend on their need, their customers, their goals, where they're at today and what they're missing to get to their next desired stage. But that also can present maybe a concern for someone in the audience to be like, hey, well, can I really afford a guy that's intervened more than 100 companies? I would love to get his expertise, but this may be too expensive. Well, that's the beauty, as we said in the title, fractional, fractional chief revenue or growth officer. They don't need to hire you for a full-time placement, 300K a year. Well, guess what? They can just hire you for a couple of hours because you have the expertise where you'll be able to find where they may have a pain, what the solution may be, and with just 20 minutes or an hour, 3 hours per week, you can start to move them in the right direction and guide them. So before we started the call, you were showing me some of the documents on your page and the listings that you've created in the CloudTask marketplace in terms of the things that you verify. And you just mentioned a few things like the sequences, the messaging, even the targeting. Do they have the right tech stack in place? But there's a long list of items that you go through to make sure that everything is in pristine shape. Would you mind sharing the screen and walk us through some of those documents or things that you typically look at, just so that the audience can get a better feel for the scope or how far is the reach of your consultation services in terms of go-to-market and revenue strategies?
Let's do it.
Awesome. I see you're sharing the screen. There we go.
Awesome. So this first one I pulled up was actually the Chief Revenue Growth as a Service, which just like, product as a service, SaaS, software as a service, it's the same mindset. This is when you need a partner. You want to bring in that partner that can help you build this, that you don't know what to do. You want them to do it. And so this is, roughly every engagement's, custom size, but 8 to 10 hours a week is usually what fractional means. You can go up to about 20. Beyond that's not really a fractional executive. And obviously that's a component of where you'd like to be as well, based on where you're at in the business. We meet you there. So this is from our website that goes into this a little bit more details. If you want to talk more about that, as you saw on the last page, there's a calendar link in there, and my calendar's up to date. But essentially, what Fractional Growth as a Service does is it provides you a number of things weekly, ongoing basis. You can see that there's pain points we target and what have you. Our approach essentially is to develop and deliver your program for you. So it's across the board: sales, marketing, partnerships, and alliances, things to that effect. To that point, I had a go-to-market checklist that kind of goes through that at a very detailed level. Essentially, if this is in the case of like you need to launch from the beginning. So like if you have an existing business, you don't necessarily need to build out the entire company. But again, like this is potentially a 40-second company I might develop, and I'm putting together my thoughts on the things that would need to happen. And so essentially there's a number of things that you have to look at in that case. Sales strategy, obviously you need asset, you need a deck, you need to have, but before that is effective. That's really the first thing you need. You need to have the Sales Cloud or sell, but there's a whole bunch of things that relates to that. That's important. If you have an existing marketing team, you need to make sure that there's communication between the marketing and sales and all that. And so there's a component of that too, where like, an SLA or alignment between sales. We've seen that frequently as actually one of the key first steps before you get to some of the other things that you need to get to. So you see how these are ordered. And in that case, every instance, you got to order where the priorities are. Right. And a lot of times you have to build just in time. Like you can't do it all right, perfect. You need to basically say, we're going to lay these tracks down. They're going to come flying in right before the train rolls over them. And that's when you build companies, that's what you do. It's not always about timing, but that's where our expertise comes in as well. Where we've seen so many different things. We know in this instance, messaging and positioning is important, but maybe that's not the priority. In another instance, messaging and positioning could be the fundamental priority.
The main thing to fix, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll scroll through so you can see some of the others. Sales process handoffs, always a huge component of that. And so and these are always custom designed. Every organization is slightly different in their build. One of the things that you'll see here highlighted weekly pipeline calls. Like for a fractional service, that's essentially, so at the beginning of the week, you set up a strategy session with the CEO and whoever needs to be involved in those conversations to figure out, okay, what does success look like for this week? And then you set up a weekly pipeline report. That's an accountability session, essentially, to go through and keep everybody on track. You meet, on a daily basis as required for the huddle that you have ongoing. And so all this depends on what resources the client has, and we'll custom tailor that to fit how their organization has been designed. Everybody's going to be slightly different, and we can approach it from different lenses. You might have account managers, you might have account executives, you might have inside sales, outside sales, you might have commission only. We can help with that as well, as far as figuring out what does your strategy need to be for not only your pricing strategy for your product, but what does your compensation strategy need to be for your sales team. So that way you're making sure to make effective use of their time and motivating them to be successful for themselves and for the company.
I like it because there's not only like someone in the audience considering hiring you is not only getting a diagnosis and the prescription, but it sounds based on these weekly reports and follow-ups that they're also getting a continued monitoring of the implementation of the recommended solution. Hey, if you need to revamp your messaging or redesign your ICP and who you're targeting,
yes,
this is how you do it. But then you have those weekly reports to stay in tune. How are we doing on that front? Now that we tuned the new ICP, does your old messaging continue to work, or do we need to refine that too? Cool. This is how you should change it. And then next week, let's follow up. What are the changes? Have we seen an uptick in the clicks and the opens? Excellent. What is the next bottleneck? Continue to fix that. So it's not just, hey, here's a recommendation. Go ahead and fix that. See you later. If you want to hear from me again, pay me again. But more like an ongoing, let's say, process system that you put in place. So they not only fix the problem that they have, but you also monitor that they don't fall back, right? They continue to improve. And I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, through this consultation, if you tell them, for instance, it's the messaging that you need to revamp, you give them the theories, templates, examples, and ideas. So not only they're making the change that they need to make, but they're also understanding, why is it that I need to make this change? And what about this improvement is it that I need to change? And what's the impact going to be? So they're kind of like learning, right, how to be a proper chief revenue officer, chief growth officer, as they receive your service, even on a fractional basis. So I think that's pretty important. I guess
that one of the things to differentiate with this particular product as well, there is that capable with one of the other listings we have in the store, which is, more along the lines of the consulting. This one is a fractional. So the main difference would be you can either get someone that completely comes in and creates these artifacts on a consultative basis. That would be really more along the lines of the, and we have I can pull back to the service offerings here to kind of illustrate that. But essentially, this is strategic playbook consulting is where that falls into. And we have those on the marketplace as well, where we create those actual artifacts, we figure out where the problems is, and that's across the entire spectrum. So we can audit, we can develop, they'll learn, and they can coach. And that can also be on an ongoing basis. Usually what I find is that's going to be a 3-month engagement. Usually with fractional, it's plus or minus 9 months typically, depending on the particular need. And it's really the main difference between fractional too is you're a partner for the client at that point versus an outside hired gun that's fixing the issue. So there's an ongoing, so you're coming in as an executive leader to actually help, and you're part of the executive team essentially. And so you're there. If there's a CMO, they're either someone that would report to you, or there's someone that you would collaborate very closely with, depending on what the client's organization was. If there's an admin, they might be their chief of staff that all the executives report to. Whatever that function looks like, we're not coming in when we come in fractional to replace the existing functions. We're coming to augment what's already missing. So if they already have a fractional CRO, or rather if they have someone in mind they want to develop into their CRO, then the offer, you could do this for 9 months. And then basically the success criteria for that 9 months would be that you hand that over to that person and they learn. But the other one is from day one. That's its only goal. So we're like, if you need to know the information, get the knowledge transfer quick, this is designed better to get it in right there. Whereas this is, if you go in with the mindset of the fractional, it's more about, yes, but probably the first 6 months is going to be like 90%. Like you don't necessarily need anybody in there to be able to learn from it, which that can be a huge gap that they might have. But it gives you time to figure out what does that future state look like. Some clients, I've known people that have been in fractionals. Like my first fractional role was for 4 years, but that's unusual. I've also had fractional roles that were for 2 months. It was really more of an interim fractional in that case. But usually the goal is to lead them whole and better and improved, no matter how long the engagement's for. So that way, and so they're going to learn as they go along the way. The differentiation between the two is just how much support one-on-one hands-on do they get. Like with that consulting one, they're not going to get really any hands-on support. They'll get advising as a part of it. I'm always advising, so they might not pick the advising coaching category, but they'll get that no matter what. But it's kind of like, what do they need? It's sort of like anything else. What specifically do they need for where they are in the journey at that time?
Right. I guess the common denominator for the users of this service would be companies and company leaders that realize that what got them here is not going to get them to the next stage.
Yes.
That's the only thing that they have in common. What's going to be the ladder that they climb? That's something that you'll provide for them specifically once you run this diagnosis. Now, that takes
I
me
would say there's one other side to that. The other common denominator is that the people that want to keep climbing that ladder up is a key component.
Yes, of course. They need to be hungry.
Yeah.
It needs to hurt, not being able to grow any further. Now, that was going to be related to my next question, which is someone in the audience may be listening to this episode and saying, hey, maybe I do need to have a session with coffee consulting group. What would you recommend in terms of the tasks, deliverables, or people that they need to consider in terms of working with you and growing to that next stage? What would you recommend for someone in the audience to prepare, to consider in terms of having a meeting with you, at least at first meeting, and making that meeting as successful as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that, the first jumping off point is just, what is your number, one pain point that you're aware of, and and then number two being, what do you think is the area that you most don't know, the known unknowns, right? And then the third part of that, this whole list of the backlog is essentially that, as far as, but I would say where you focus in on for the most part is, if you have an existing team, for example, then my advice would be, what are the current sort of dynamics on that team, as far as, should be a point of discussion as far as that goes. And then what's currently being used to help hold them accountable, it should be a component of that. And then where do you feel like they are at in achieving that? Those would be, and then that will start the conversation. And just like you and I here today, we'll get to sort of the pain points pretty quick. It won't take us a long time to get to some really quick pain points of problems that could be the jumping off point of a solution. And some of those are going to be things that they're going to get some information. Hopefully it's going to be a good enough call that they get information in that call that they walk away smarter, and they're implementing solutions before you've even implemented a project. I mean, in my experience, that's been the case. I mean, I've had plenty of 30-minute conversations with CEOs before in the past, where at the end of it, they got like a 1.5x or 2x out of it for free, just from a 30-minute call. So, and I'm good with that, because like, if you really want to significantly scale, that's what I'm there for. And like, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Go for it. I share thought leadership. That's the same sort of stuff. And you can get wisdom and what have you. But yeah, if you're serious about, tackling huge problems, big ambitions, really want to do things, that's where good partnerships like this can potentially be the right fit, if that's where you're at in that time.
Fantastic. I can definitely see people consuming your content getting a lot of aha moments even before they have that first session, or as they have that first session,
Yeah.
and before they pay the first dime. Now, this takes me then to the last question that I have for you today, Lawrence, which is around the success criteria. That based on everything that you've shared, I know that it's going to be um, it's wide. It's not just one thing that
Yes.
they're going to use, because it depends on their own problems. But based on the majority of companies that you work with in that space of funded startups, maybe seed round, Series A, maximum B, SMBs, what would you say is the typical success metric that they use to evaluate the efficiency of working with Lawrence?
Yeah, that's a valid question. I think to your point, it's going to vary. I do have, sort of a list of a bunch of different pain points, across the categories.
Right.
Without going through that huge, massive list of different things, because there can be lots of problems across the board. It usually falls into one of two buckets for the most part. First and foremost, it's either not enough revenue, and so they're not meeting targets, so be increasing that revenue. So, for example, like if they were at 5% CAGR and they're supposed to be at 20% CAGR over certain predefined timestones and milestones, by increasing metrics, that can be a component. Another could be a matter of where they might have growth and they're not hitting certain targets. So that could be a matter of one, like they might not have the right lifetime value for a client identified. So we in the project tweak, without giving away too much of the secret sauce. We tweak different components within the go-to-market strategy, like a component of that's going to go back to your ICP and persona who you're talking, your messaging, things to that effect. But where you're looking at that is like basically how much are my customers costing me CAC to onboard, how much are value over our lifetime are we getting lifetime value, how are we increasing those potentially. Really, businesses, everyone talks about EBITDA in revenue, and I think it's arguable all companies should be looking at it. Should be looking at gross margin. What is your total cost of revenue, and what is your revenue? The difference between that, essentially, it's kind of like when you look at the lens of what is your operating cost, right? And your cost of goods sold. Cost of revenue is a much more indicative of what the true profit is. And so that's why I would say that's your fundamental metric you look at. So you want to kind of increase revenue, decrease cost, and increase your to a healthy point, your whatever that is for your industry. Is that 30% profit margin, whatever it is. And that's really like the key success criteria as far as across the board. If you nailed it down, it's those three. But then it could be there's going to be North Stars in different areas that you say, this means I get that. And you want to
like leading indicators, right?
Yes, 100%. And sometimes that's actually the one you want to focus on as far as what's the outcome in that project. Because if the others take 6 months or whatever the time frame is, based on everyone agreeing, looking at our roadmap we put together, we want to make sure that we're achieving success and wins. We want to set really, it's kind of like any organization that, advice I give across the board. You basically, if every one of the companies making their metrics, then that's, that means your metrics aren't aggressive enough. If no one is making it there, then you have a different kind of pain point. You want to look at the ones that you can measure, that you have, a 95% chance of, getting information and feedback as quickly as you possibly can. And so I think you definitely want to look at all of them. And you really, in my mind, you focus on those three, but like there are going to be specific ones that can give you intel and intent faster. And those are the ones you want to dial in as well. And that's true when you're setting your KPIs, that what gets measured gets managed, as Peter Drucker would always say.
100%. Yes. And I love this because I've also heard this theory that, everything rolls up to revenue, right? As a macro indicator. But I've also heard that you have multiple levers and KPIs that you can tweak within a company. And I've heard this theory that even if you find 7 different levers that you can tweak to maybe no more than 10%, you may be able to double your revenue. You don't have to take something from 20 to 100. You may just take it from 20 to 30, another thing from 30 to 40, another one from 70 to 80. And those 10% increments in little places or in different places, if you get at least 7 of those, double your business. So I can definitely see these solutions coming into play, multiple pain point areas, multiple KPIs that could be tracked to see a positive trend that will ultimately lead to more revenue. Lawrence, this has been an amazing episode. I want to share that anyone in the audience considering to hire Coffee Consulting can definitely go to the CloudTask Marketplace. Take a look at the different listings that you have. Today, we've spoken a lot about startups, funded companies, SMBs, but there will be also other listings for enterprise companies, mid-market companies. Go look for the one that best suits your needs and book some time with Lawrence. As he said, his calendar is updated. He'll be happy to assist you. Lawrence, anything else you want to share with the audience before we part ways on this episode?
No, if for anyone that's need a cup of coffee and having a chat, look forward to hearing more about it and seeing where we can't get you settled.
I love it, Lawrence. Definitely give it a try. Also, the Colombian coffee, little
There
cue
you
over
go.
there. All right, Lawrence, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Hoping to catch you on a future episode. And for you in the audience, again, go to the CloudTask Marketplace, take a look at Coffee Consulting Group, and I'm sure you'll find something interesting. I'll see you in a future episode. Catch you later. Bye-bye.